Welcome back to Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today is my Father's Day tribute. Although a number of the men on the series did become fathers, both in real life and on the series, Jason, Ben, John Boy, I thought today I would focus more on the two characters that we most thought of and were the most prominent as fathers throughout the series, starting with Will Geer. If you're enjoying these, please do hit like and subscribe. I often heard it said that Will Geer playing Grandpa was probably the character that was closest to him in real life. And I'd have to agree with that. In real life, Will was larger than life and always interested in people and things around him. He traveled a lot. He loved meeting new people and having new experiences. And so you always felt his presence on the set, and I think you always felt his presence on screen, too. Although he was not so much a father figure, we were very aware of him being John's father and the times when the two of them, sometimes they butted heads if Grandpa felt that he wasn't needed as much or that John wasn't taking his advice, so that would happen sometimes, but he also stepped into a more paternal role at times with some of the younger, the grandchildren. I remember particularly in the Dust Bowl Cousins, when John Boy is trying to decide how to deal with the situation with our cousin Job. And ultimately, because of Mary Ellen and Job, pushing himself on Mary Ellen, he gets into an actual fight with Job. Job has been baiting him and accusing him of not wanting to fight. And John Boy has a conversation with Grandpa about that. And ultimately, Grandpa advises him well, and John Boy finally decides something is important enough to him to step up for. So I always loved those kinds of scenes with Will when we saw that he really was the patriarch of the family. So we saw the fun-loving Grandpa. We saw the one who loved to visit with the Baldwin sisters and sample the recipe, and how much that irritated Grandma, and the beautiful relationship between Grandma and Grandpa. That there was a lot of bickering, but there was clearly a lot of love, and you saw that those very touching moments when Grandpa was ill, and then when Grandma was in the hospital, and then after Ellen had her stroke, and the fact that Will Geer was the one who insisted when she didn't show up at work that they go make sure she was okay, and it quite possibly saved her life. And then when she came back, that beautiful episode of Grandma Comes Home between the two of them, and that sadly it was Ellen's first episode back, and yet it ended up being Will's last episode. And then we did that incredibly touching scene up on the mountain, saying goodbye to Grandpa, at his graveside. So real life interacted with character life so many times on the Waltons, and that was very much the case with Will. He evidently did an interview one time where he talked about how much of his dialogue was ad-libbed. I don't think it was maybe as much as he implied, but I think they gave him a lot of latitude, and I think they utilized a lot of what he knew in the character, all about plants, and he evidently planted that garden, the Walton garden on the back lot, and he cared for it as well. So he was very engaged in that sense. And he was constantly adding in things, or things would be scripted because of his background in botany and his knowledge of plants. And he was always reeling off the Latin name of plants and stuff, and he knew how to grow them and all kinds of stuff. So we all sort of got an education from Will about plants and nature, and so that got added into scripts a lot. The other thing with Will was that if there was a bit of air in a scene, if somebody either forgot a line or just took a pause for too long, Will would just jump in and he'd start ad-libbing. So it's like you had to be right on top of your lines. You didn't stop and think about how you wanted to say something. You just pop in, otherwise Will had taken the scene and run with it. And very often he would, at the ends of scenes, he didn't just finish his scripted dialogue and that was the end of the scene. He would continue on, and quite often those ad-libs at the ends of scenes were kept because they were so charming and they were so realistic. So I loved those pieces of Will that we got to see on screen as well. Ralph Waite as John Walton, in my opinion, was the best representation of a father figure on television. The chemistry between John Walton and Olivia Walton was just magic. I adored watching the two of them on screen and just wanted those parents. I mean, who didn't want those parents? No matter how great your parents were, who wouldn't want John and Olivia Walton as your parents? John was strong and full of integrity. He was hardworking. He was honest. He helped people. He helped his neighbors. He helped people who came, just onto the mountain and needed something. He was just a truly compassionate man and gave his children great advice, supported us when we needed it, and was a disciplinarian when needed, but just all the best in a father figure. Ralph in real life was equally passionate about the things he cared about. He fought for the little man. He believed in causes. And I once heard it said that, or any number of times heard it said that if John Walton ran for president, he would win. And I totally understand that. In real life, Ralph did run for public office a couple of times. Unfortunately, in real life, he never had the opportunity to serve his constituents. But I think he would have made a wonderful, public figure in that sense, and a wonderful representative. He had not originally planned to do a series. Evidently, he was just trying to get enough money to go back to New York and do theater. And his agent said, I have this audition for you. And he's like, I don't want to do television. He's like, yeah, well, it's a show. It won't go, but you'll do a few episodes. You'll make a little bit of money, and then you can go back to New York and do theater. Clearly, that's not how it turned out, which thank goodness for all of us who had all those wonderful years to enjoy Ralph's work. But I think at times, it was difficult being this perfect figure, and I'm sure, like all of us, sometimes it was hard living up to that screen presence. One time I remember him telling us a story about going away on vacation. He was someplace in Europe, and he just wanted to get away from the publicity and the people and all of the, being John Walton. So he was just in some tiny remote village someplace, and he walked into some sort of a little store, and he looks up, and there's a TV in there, and they're playing the Waltons. And he was like, that's me. And the store, he's like, yeah, that's me. And the person's like, no. So all of a sudden in that moment, he wanted the person to actually acknowledge that was him, and they didn't believe him. So I just thought that was a really sweet story. I loved how Ralph always wanted everything to be realistic, that his clothes not be too neat and clean and pressed, and if he'd been working, that they were dirty, that he was sweaty, that, his hair was a mess. He just went for those points of realism, both for himself and for the rest of the cast. If he was working with the children, he would insist that people ate. It's like you would eat, you're hungry. And when he directed, that he cared about all those little details, that real life be happening, and that, the shots, were clever and told the story, but in an interesting way. And, that he was always looking to be innovative in that sense. And he wanted life happening, not only that we were realistic in the way we looked and acted, but that there was family life going on. Because it was a big family, and people didn't just sit around and stop and talk to each other. I mean, in real life, that we're always doing something. So I really appreciate him more and more as I watch these episodes he directed. So having him there for so many seasons was just such a gift in so many ways, and he will always be my daddy. I also wanted to touch briefly on Earl Hamner, without whom none of this would exist. Although not every episode was based on something that actually happened in Earl's life, the broad strokes are all very much Earl. He grew up in rural Virginia with, in real life, 8 brothers and sisters. Of course, on the Waltons, that became 7. But with his mother and father, I believe his grandparents didn't live in the house, but lived nearby. And he dreamed of being a writer. He did go to New York. He started originally, I think, in radio in New York, writing for radio, and then did make his way to Hollywood, where he became a successful writer and ultimately wrote a show about his very own roots growing up in rural Virginia, for which I will be eternally grateful. Earl was, he was the epitome of the Southern gentleman. He was kind, he was gracious, he was funny, and he shared so much of himself through his work. I love that he did the narration, that warm, rich voice. I always felt like we were in such good hands when I would hear that opening narration, and then how perfect to wind each episode, again with his gentle Southern accent. We are so lucky to have had him as a part of the show and to literally have done all that narration. Of the Walton family cast members, I'm the only one with a father still living. So I would like to wish my own father a very happy Father's Day. And for all the other fathers out there, we celebrate you. We are all who we are because of the influence of you in our lives. And I know that despite any mistakes our fathers may have made along the way, I'm sure that the majority of them were doing the very best they knew how. So let's all celebrate them. And thank you for joining me for this tribute to fathers. I will be back with more behind the scenes of the Waltons and more Ask Judy. Thanks for watching.